Make up mind. Fight.
A very common sentiment echoed by longtime TF2 players is that each class's respective stock weapons, or the weapons every player starts out with without having to invest any time or money into the game, are the objective best-in-slot picks for every class. This is mostly true from my experience. Unlockable weapons in TF2 tend to be side grades or diversions more than anything, and for the most pure, uninhibited version of every class, stock weapons are the way to go. But not always. A few noteworthy exceptions do exist within TF2. Weapons that, through the community's own admission and developed metas, do effectively outclass and replace the stock weapons of their classes. These weapons are very few and far between, and in a game with over 130 unlockables, it's a wonder that so few do exist. But to some extent, they still do, and in this video, I want to talk about them. These are TF2's stock replacement weapons, or best-in-slot weapons that require some sort of investment from the player to earn. I want to stress that I'm not making this video as any sort of indictment or hit on Valve or the game. I'd much rather a free-to-play game use TF2's unlockable system than some other games, and at the end of the day, I unabashedly love this 17-year-old game and just want to review its weapons through a unified filter. That said, let's roll.
Check out who I just met buying a crossbow. This dude is the shit.
I shall use this crossbow to pierce my broken heart.
So we're going to be making this video as kind of a medic sandwich, and I mean that in terms of what weapons we're reviewing in what order, and not some obscure DeviantArt fetish. But yeah, Medic actually has two of these weapons. He's in an interesting position because both his stock primary, the syringe gun, and his stock melee, the bone saw, are often cited as some of the worst and most disposable stock weapons in the game. He's helped tremendously by his stock secondary being far and away the single best stock weapon in the game, but if you're a fresh installed TF2 player, you're objectively not playing Medic at peak performance until you start unlocking some weapons. And when it comes to primaries, you'd be hard pressed to find a better one than the Crusader's Crossbow. The Crusader's Crossbow is the unlockable TF2 weapon. It's very often cited as the single best unlockable in the game, and I remember watching videos from as far back as like 2011 declaratively calling it the best tool on offer to any class. It offers so much utility to the average Medic player that the opportunity cost of not equipping it is oftentimes a direct detriment to yourself and your team. The Overdose and the Blutsauger certainly have merit, but they also have some very stiff competition in the form of the crossbow. It's also, funnily enough, not a crossbow. Like, this is a gun with crossbow furnishings. It doesn't have a drawstring that pulls back or any true crossbow mechanisms. But even with its deceptive design, it's still an amazing weapon. Let's discuss why. The Crusader's Crossbow is an unlockable primary weapon for Medic, an elaborately decorated gun disguised as a crossbow. This weapon fires singular syringes in a clean, lengthy arc that both heal teammates and deal damage to enemies. The healing and damage are affected by reverse damage fall off, increasing in potency the further away the medic is from his target. The healing is always double the damage this weapon would deal to enemies, and isn't affected in potency based on how recently the target has taken damage, making this weapon exceptionally strong for in-the-moment burst healing from any range. It also builds Ubercharge with successful heals, so the amount is lower than the equivalent healing with the Medigun. This weapon's only downsides are a completely negligible no headshot stat, and having 75% less reserve ammo than stock, which doesn't really matter due to being a single shot weapon and not a rapid fire one like the stock syringe gun. It also reloads while it isn't the active weapon for good measure. First thing to mention here, as it's imperative to understanding the crossbow's basic role, is that this is not a hit scan weapon. It's cut from a very similar mechanical cloth to the Huntsman, firing a fast moving arced projectile that has to be tracked in lead rather than instantly hitting enemies you click on. This is similar to Medic's other syringe guns to an extent, whereas they shoot rapid fire needles that travel very quickly, the crossbow fires a single big chonkin arrow that sticks into enemies and surfaces. Its firing speed and arc are universal, unlike the Huntsman, and don't have a charging mechanism or anything like that, but otherwise, it's basically an air gun that shoots big needles. Learning to aim and land Crusader's crossbow bolts is a medic skill in and of itself. But here's the thing. The Crusader's crossbow is the best unlockable weapon in TF2. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. There certainly are a few stock weapons that might outpace it, but in terms of raw utility afforded to a single class through equipping an unlockable weapon, the Crusader's crossbow is far and away the best singular tool in the game. This thing is medic. If you want to play the most highly optimized, useful to your team version of the best class in the game, you have to run the Crusader's crossbow. Medic does have other unlockable syringe guns that are good, but there's a reason you always get weird looks from your team for equipping them. They are eclipsed in general all-purpose utility by the Crusader's crossbow. To be completely fair though, when it comes specifically to combat and fighting enemies, it is definitely outpaced somewhat by Medic's other syringe long-range guns. The Crusader's Crossbow fires singular bolts in a linear arc, and while it certainly is possible to line up an incredibly flex long-range skill shot and pick some fleeing low-health enemy, it's also very committal to fire even a single bolt, and when you're dealing with an average per-shot damage of around 50 per, it's not great for extended, dedicated gunfights. It absolutely can be a fringe burst damage killing tool in the face of an enemy who's already been softened up or just needs that little push into death, but in general, this weapon is best used as a healing tool that can also secure kills, and not the other way around. And when it comes to being a healing tool, well, this thing's just about as good as it can possibly be. To put it simply, it is very strong and very useful to be able to heal enemies from a distance as medic. When you first read this thing's stats, you might think that the healing on hit effect is some cheap novelty that heals off like 10 per hit or something, but no, this thing heals in excess of 75 health per syringe at the lowest amounts, and up to 150 at the highest. Getting good at landing crossbow bolts is an important skill check on medic. Being able to consistently throw out skill shots from across the map to instantly top off teammates and keep them in the fight can be vitally important to you and your team's success, and is ultimately just as important of a medic skill as uber management. Medic is sometimes criticized for being an easy or simple class, but using the crossbow well is a skill that requires practice and good aim. And what's really crazy is that it isn't just good for long-range Hail Mary healing. In the throes of an impactful push or heated team fight, being able to instantly heal someone for 75 or more HP at close to medium range with a single bolt can be just what they need to get back in the fight, and allows you to be much more dynamic in picking your heal targets and topping off multiple teammates. The in-the-moment burst healing afforded by this weapon is tremendous, and if you're ever in the throes of healing your tanky pocket and see an unfortunate wounded light class hobble up to you like a hurt animal, a single crossbow bolt is all you need to send them on their way. It allows you to be incredibly non-committal and consistent in healing multiple teammates extremely quickly, rather than needing to plant your feet and attach your medigun leash to each one for several seconds. And guess what? You still get uber for this. While it is true that the uber per healing rate is less than what you get for the same amount of healing on the medigun, you're still gaining uber either way, which makes quick burst healing with the crossbow an incredibly risk-free and no drawbacks way of doling out heals to your entire team. Fun fact, the only straight-up nerfs this weapon ever received were in Jungle Inferno, surprise surprise, and it was to make its uber build rate scale based on your heal target's recent damage in the same way as the mediguns. This was a fair change to make, as it did effectively allow the crossbow to completely outpace the medigun before this, but they didn't remember to give its healing the same scaling, so it's still capable of outputting insane burst healing all the same. And that's kind of the thing with the Crusader's Crossbow. When it comes to healing specifically, this thing does literally everything the medigun does at an arguably much more flexible and compact pace. While I would never argue that this weapon outpaces or replaces the medigun, you definitely should not follow behind your pocket repeatedly sticking them with crossbow bolts. It most certainly augments and facilitates the medigun in the way that an unlockable weapon in this game can usually only dream of. This is like the single best tool in the game at making the class it's featured on even better at doing what they do naturally. And when what that class does naturally is inarguably the most important role to fill in the game, healing teammates and providing uber, then you've got the recipe for a very good weapon. While it's not great for straight up combat, Medic is a healer first and foremost, and what this weapon allows him to do in the field of healing makes it without a doubt his most consistent and reliable tool in facilitating his basic job. This thing basically takes Medic's already potent supportive capabilities and just straps rockets to them. In not equipping the Crusader's Crossbow, you are objectively depriving you and your team of what could otherwise be very impactful utility and flexibility. There's not a single other weapon in TF2 with this much opportunity cost for not equipping it, and for that, the Crusader's Crossbow is probably the best weapon in TF2. Also, it's the only one in this video that's not an achievement item, so have fun getting one.
I never want to leave this bed. Uh-oh. Gotta take a whiz.
I bet you didn't expect to see this one in the video, unless you looked at the thumbnail. Can you tell I script these pretty late? Yeah, the sniper's very iconic Jarate isn't exactly cut from the same cloth as the other weapons in this video. Whereas every other weapon we'll discuss here effectively acts as an augment or extension to their class's natural abilities that only makes those natural abilities stronger, giving up little to nothing when changing from stock, the Jarate teeters much closer to being a side grade. There is a reasonable argument to be made that it is different enough from the sniper stock SMG to not warrant being in this video. That said, I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we pretended that most new sniper players, or even long-term experienced ones, wouldn't take the Gerate over Sniper's SMG 9 times out of 10. Think about it this way. Which one have you, as a TF2 player, been on the receiving end of in casual more? Have you been splashed with Gerate or gunned down by an SMG sniper more times? It is a literal jar of human piss, and yet it's one of the most consistently useful and recognizable tools in TF2. Let's talk about it. The Gerate is an unlockable achievement secondary weapon for sniper sniper. A mason jar of the sniper's own human pee, this weapon is a throwable that travels in a clean arc and shatters on contact with any surface or enemy it touches. Once shattered, nearby enemies are coated in the glorious yellow nectar within for 10 seconds, which induces a variety of negative effects. Enemies coated in Jarate take mini crits from all sources of damage, including things typically unable to deal crits like sentries or afterburn. Their player model is given a yellow tint, and their view is covered in a warbly yellow overlay effect. Additionally, enemy spies soaked by Jarate have their cloaks and disguises shorted out, revealing their positions through the visual debuffs. Lastly, the Jarate can be used to extinguish both yourself and teammates while on fire, and doing so will reduce its usual cooldown from 20 to 16 seconds. So, before we talk about anything to do with this weapon's gameplay, we need to talk about its design and concept. It certainly demands some degree of attention. TF2 was definitely an irreverent game before Jarate was introduced. It had a wacky and over-the-top sense of humor from the very beginning, but the introduction of Jarate in 2009 was when the game's true sensibilities were put on full display. It was literally revealed as an unassuming background joke in Meet the Sniper, and later as an April Fool's joke, with nobody seriously considering it as a weapon in-game. But then it was, and was given a ton of publicity through a series of very funny satirical comics and ads, and an overall intense spotlight in the game's marketing and branding. Jarate, despite how irreverent and disgusting the concept is a weapon that's greatly demonstrative of TF2's charm, wit, and one-of-a-kind writing and sense of humor. Combine this with its very funny name that completely omits anything to do with it being P from its branding. It's literally just jar and karate combined, and you've got a weapon that clearly demonstrates why TF2 was such a keeper even back in the late 2000s. Also, it's P, and that's funny. But in terms of gameplay, what makes the Jarate such a truly noteworthy tool is just how much it erases snipers' typical struggle points as a class. This is a weapon that, through its simple existence, nullifies a ton of snipers' base level hard counters and difficulties. It's actually pretty controversial for this reason. I've heard a lot of people argue that the Jarate is one of the most poorly balanced and ill-conceived weapons in the game, which is funny because very little of that umbrage has to do with it being a jar of human urine. People's issue with the Jarate stems from the fact that it's a very non-committal weapon that allows Sniper, a class infamous for one-shotting at long range, to do the same thing at close range without the required skill investment of quickscope headshots. Should the most oppressive class in the game at long range also be capable of doing the same things at close range? I don't know, I'm a heavy main. I basically eat crayons. But yeah, the Jarate's primary utility to the sniper is as a Hail Mary panic button for over-encroaching flankers. When combined with the Bushwalker, a weapon that deals guaranteed 195 damage crits whenever it would normally mini-crit, you've basically got a guaranteed one-shot instant death combo on all of the game's most noteworthy flankers that only requires 4 inputs to use properly. Press 2, press mouse 1, press W, and press mouse 1 again. Considering that all of the game's most common flankers have less than 195 HP, and that even a roamer soldier will likely be softened up from rocket jumping to your position, this effectively allows Sniper to mollywop anyone who gets within his personal space. Literally only a heavy and a perfectly healthy soldier can survive the old Jarate chop. This is dubious for multiple reasons, but the most of which is that Sniper is already the most oppressive class in the game at long range. Conventional game design logic would henceforth lead you to believe that he'd naturally be weaker at close range, but TF2 isn't exactly known for being conventional. What this results in is frequent situations where you'll bust your crumb trying to close the distance on a cracked Sniper, only for him to whip out his P-jar and wanker whacker and put you 6 feet down under before you can react. I honestly don't even feel like the Jarate or Bushwalker are especially over-centralizing on their own, just exceptionally strong as a combo. I understand wanting to design weapons to cover a class's weaknesses, but I also don't think that the game's dedicated long-range instant kill class should also be capable of instant killing at close range. Think about what Sniper's most common hard counters are. A scout getting behind him, shooting him before he can unscope, a soldier rocket jumping to his position and popping him up for a sleek air shot, a spy sneaking behind him and taking advantage of his tunnel vision, etc. All of these things keep Sniper in check under normal, casual gameplay circumstances, yet when put on the receiving end of the old Jarate Bushwalker failsafe, they're suddenly much less capable of safely taking him on one-on-one. While it can be argued that all you need to do is avoid and stay out of the Sniper's melee range, depending on the map and game state, that's not always an option. The Jarate Bushwalker combo really is one of the most effective and dangerous item synergies in the game. That said, when removed from the Bushwalker combo context, I find the Jarate to be a pretty fun and neat weapon that's nowhere near as over-centralizing as it is in that context. Part of my appreciation for the Jarate is just how how strong it is as a supportive tool. As I mentioned earlier, the debuff is unique in that it causes enemies to take guaranteed mini-crits from sources that can't usually do that, and they also mitigate damage fall off, meaning that you can be an enormous help to your team by just splashing this item on enemies and setting your team loose. The amount of mileage you can get out of just blind tossing this item at a group of opponents and pissing off is pretty insane, and any teammate will appreciate dealing no frills mini-crits just because their sniper took in too many liquids the previous night. If you can angle your throw just right to maximize the amount of enemies you hit with the splash, you can have a surprisingly hefty impact on a push and the results of a match. This is effectively an AoE debuff that you can apply to multiple enemies at a time. While it is tempting to save it for personal selfish use, it can genuinely be a game winner when used proactively. Additionally, this weapon can extinguish teammates, which I'm actually not entirely certain P can do in real life, stay in school kids, and this is an underrated utility in my opinion. A sniper who's on fire is likely unable to perform his basic role without saintly focus due to the constant aim punch that afterburn causes, so in a pinch, tossing Jarate to extinguish yourself can be worth it to stay in the fight and keep sniping. When it comes to a teammate, take note of their health. If a teammate is on death's door, especially a medic or team anchor, and is burning, sacrificing the Jarate for 16 seconds is a worthwhile exchange for keeping them alive. There's nothing like being the golden savior of your team and casting your healing nectar to rescue them from a fiery, narrow death. However, if you're near spawn, a health pack, a healthy medic, or just water, you might want to conserve your Jarate for a more pressing use case. Despite how good it feels to save a teammate, it is pretty embarrassing to waste your Jarate and then have them walk into a resupply cabinet anyways. That's ultimately the Jarate's real negative. It's very committal to use even once due to its lengthy cooldown, and since it's expended after a single use, you have to exercise caution and picky choosiness with enemies and how you use it. Compared to the SMG, which can provide constant pressure to enemies and a safe fallback tool, or the backpacks, which have passive use cases, Sniper's Jarate is a somewhat committal and active weapon that lives and dies by how intelligently you use it. That said, when it is used intelligently, it's without a doubt Sniper's most impactful and consistently useful secondary, and one that can absolutely turn the tides of a round with proper usage. The ease of securing a pick on an important enemy playmaker skyrockets when they're taking 35% extra guaranteed damage from all sources. All in all, the Jarate just barely scrapes its way into this video. If Sniper had a better stock secondary, I could easily see this being more of an argument, but as is, the Jarate's all-around utility compared to how disposable the SMG is really results in a very easy decision for most Sniper players. For reference, I am a stock SMG apologist. I have an Australian one for a reason, but even I can't deny what the true golden god of sniper secondaries is. The Jarate just offers too much for a serious sniper player to not at least consider bringing in most traditional loadouts. While I don't usually discuss competitive on this channel, it is worth noting that the Jarate is fully banned in all traditional comp formats, and is all around not a weapon you see there too often because of it. It's a disgusting, dubiously balanced weapon, yet also one of TF2's most iconic and recognizable staples. This is definitely Sniper's number 1, number 2.
Sandwich, sandwich, I'm in love with you.
Ah, my boy, my dog, my lunch. In case you don't know, Heavy Sandvich is my chalk pick for my personal favorite unlockable weapon in TF2. While I do agree that its general domination over Heavy secondary slot has been mitigated somewhat since the introduction of the second banana, it's still far and away better than any other option in Heavy secondary arsenal, and despite the insistence of some very dedicated fat scout mains, is the secondary you want to be bringing on Heavy for most traditional loadouts. It offers so much to not only the Heavy wielding it, but also to his team, and is ultimately the reason that Heavy is able to function as a standalone class without the constant supervision of a medic. Also, I own it in real life, so that's cool. Let's talk about the Sandvich. The Sandvich is an unlockable achievement secondary for Heavy, a sandwich composed of bread, lettuce, meat, tomato, and cheese, with a pimento olive skewered through it on a toothpick. This is a lunchbox item, meaning that using it requires the Heavy to eat it. Upon either pressing mouse 1 or the taunt button while holding the Sandvich, Heavy will enter a 4-second eating animation, complete with a very funny chomping voice line, at which point his health will be rapidly healed to max in 4 increments of 75. Heavy is healed multiple times throughout the eating animation, and the overall health gain will always equal 300, or the equivalent of Heavy's non-overhealed max health. Afterwards, the sandwich is put on a 30-second recharge timer that can be entirely skipped by picking up any size health kit while at full health. Lastly, Heavy can press mouse 2 to throw the sandwich to teammates or enemies, acting as a medium health kit that restores 50% of their HP. When Heavy is killed while eating the sandwich, he also drops it as a health kit for enemies. So I'm just gonna bury the lead here. The Sandvich is Heavy. While there is merit to the second banana as a more flanking-oriented heavy secondary, and a lot of people stand by the shotgun or family business, for a heavy who's working with their team and acting as a dedicated anchor, you will be hard-pressed to find a better secondary option to bring than the Sandvich. It offers so much sustainability and self-sufficiency to the heavy, making him so much less reliant on medics and health packs, and even comes with the added perk of being able to help teammates in the thick of things. For everything a heavy wants to be doing in the average casual match, that is soaking up damage, helping his medic, and literally throwing his weight around, the Sandvich is the best secondary option on offer. Starting from the top, having access to an on-command large health kit anytime you may need it is an ability that any class would kill for, yet is especially noteworthy on heavy, as he's the class whose biggest strength is leveraging his large health pool and damage to outlast enemies in fights. Without it, he'd be entirely reliant on health kits and medics to stay in the fight, and topped off between engagements. While it is true that the required 4-second eating animation is definitely a bit committal, there are certified ways to ensure you can do it safely and stay in the fight where you may need to. If you press your back firmly against a wall and make sure to only eat it in a safe position, or when you notice at the top of the screen that a good portion of the enemy team is in a respawn queue, then you can easily circumvent the danger that comes with the eating animation. Additionally, the Sandvich doesn't actually instantly heal you for 300 health, and you can very easily use this to your advantage. The Sandvich heals the heavy in 4 increments of 75 health throughout its eating animation, meaning that even if you're found out while eating, depending on the enemy and their weapon, you may be able to outpace their damage and counterattack simply due to the potency of the heals. I feel like a lot of people tend to note the heals heavy to max stat without actually taking into account the specific numerical bells and whistles of how it's done. Some classes with some weapons literally can't outpace the Sandvich's healing. There's nothing quite as funny as finishing your lunch and immediately aggressing on the poor unfortunate soul who just happened to be trying to interrupt it. Plus, even the Sandvich's most glaring issue, its 30-second cooldown, is easily mitigated with some map knowledge and smart resourcing. You can consume a health pack of any size to instantly refill your Sandvich's charge meter, allowing you to effectively convert either a small or medium health kit to a full 300 health heal with smart usage. Pro tip, if you're near a small or medium health pack as heavy and have a Sandvich, instead of picking up the health kit, eat the Sandvich and then pick it up. You converted what would be 150 or less HP into 600 this way. And even if you view this as selfish or depriving your team of a health kit, you've still got a guaranteed medium one in your pocket to share with anyone who needs it. Nothing is lost for you or your team by doing this, so long as you're willing to share your Sandvich with them. And speaking of sharing Sandviches with teammates, this is the definitive thing that puts the Sandvich ahead of the second banana for a dedicated team anchor heavy. When you have a Sandvich, your team always has access to a guaranteed medium health kit. The uses of this are multiple, but the most noteworthy of them is healing medics. Medic is the most important class in the game, and whether or not he's pocketing you or spreading heals around, being able to top him off and keep him in the fight with a quick 2 into M2 is an indispensable trait to help your team's efforts. Being the thing that prevents a med pick is huge, and even when you're not healing a med, you can still be your team's benevolent hero, offering tasty, nutritious treats to anyone who may need them. The Sandvich basically allows heavy, who's typically the team's tank, to fill a small supportive niche that everyone will appreciate. All said and done, the Sandvich is the weapon that enables heavy to do everything that he should be able to do. It enables him to sustain himself, stay in the fight, offer support to his team, and especially his medic, and all-around function as a proper tank. I've mentioned this before, but the introduction of the Sandvich into TF2 really does feel like the thing that fully realized heavy as a gameplay concept. This thing made him a real contender in the game's class lineup. He would be so much worse without it. This is the building block for modern-day self-sustaining tanks and class-based FPSs. When you combine that with its utility, its icon status is in the game's branding, and its hilarious design and concept, you've got a real keeper of a TF2 weapon. But to be fair, it doesn't allow you to shoot enemies while moving at normal speed, so it's bad.
What if the only thing that makes me smile is slowly soar your head off?
We've now reached the other bread slice of our medic Sandvich and our last weapon for this video. If you're at all familiar with TF2 and its meta, then I shouldn't have to tell you which weapon this is. It's the medic melee weapon, and depending on who you ask, possibly the single best melee weapon in the game, period. I've already put up the title card, so there's no reason for all this dilly-dallying. Our last weapon for this video is the Uber Saw. Now, this will be a shorter section for this video than usual, as the Uber Saw is just about as effective as it is simple. This thing is really good and can probably be properly explained in like 4 sentences or less. It's Medic's best melee weapon for a reason, so let's dive in. The Uber Saw is an unlockable achievement melee weapon for Medic. A large, rusted, bloodstained surgical saw with a glowing meter within. This weapon's primary trait is that it causes the Medic to gain 25% of his maximum Uber charge with each successfully landed hit. This means that it only requires 4 swings on an enemy to completely fill an Uber from nothing. Additionally, getting a taunt kill with this weapon results in an instant 100% Uber. You can regain Uber while using it with this weapon by switching to it and attacking enemies, allowing you to indefinitely extend Uber charges so long as there are enemies to hit. This weapon's only downside for this incredibly strong positive is a flat 20% slower swing speed, meaning that it takes just under 1 second to throw out each swing. This gives it a lower DPS than stock, but call it a hunch that most people really don't mind. So, just like the crossbow from earlier, this is an extremely useful set of positives for a comparatively negligible negative that results in an insane amount of opportunity cost for not equipping this weapon. For reference, I really like the Solemn Bow, but even I can't deny that you're basically denying you and your team a lot of potential utility by not equipping the Uber Saw. 25% of your Uber charge, which let me remind you is the game winner in TF2, the thing that the game is balanced around, is an absolutely tremendous thing to gain for a simple no-frill 65 damage melee swing. If I may bury the lead again here, I genuinely think that the Uber Saw could do with another negative, but I have no idea what you could give it that wouldn't be a buff in disguise. A damage penalty would just mean more swings. In any situation where you can safely and reliably swing on an enemy with this weapon, you're guaranteeing you and your team 1/4 of an Uber charge. Even if you only manage to get 1 swing in before an enemy dies or gets away, 25% is still gargantuan. Shaving even 10 or 15% off your Uber charge build time would be huge, and 25% for basically nothing is borderline comical. This is an inarguably, indescribably front-loaded weapon design that offers nothing but positives to the medic using it. It also random crits more than RBY Persian Slash, which is very funny. This can actually be a bit of a negative, funnily enough, as instantly killing your enemy means less swings and thus less Uber. This is a weapon where getting a random crit and instantly killing your enemy is the negative outcome. If you ever happen upon an AFK enemy, a taunting enemy, a distracted enemy, or a throwing heavy, then you're effectively looking at a guaranteed Uber charge. And even if you don't, just throwing in a random swing or two during a fight can be more than enough to top you off. I cannot stress enough how powerful this weapon is at facilitating a medic to constantly have an Uber charge up and building. The speed and efficiency with which you can gain it with this thing is insane, and allows medic to both stay on the offensive in situations where he may need to, while also simultaneously working towards his most important ability. This is actually a pretty multifaceted aspect, as it allows him to effectively extend an Uber charge duration indefinitely so long as there are enemies to hit. If you're ever using an Uber and fighting a tanky enemy, you've got nothing to lose by quickly switching to your Uber Saw, taking a pot shot, and switching back to your medigun. The time spent on Uber will likely be brief enough to be safe, and the payoff is a guaranteed 25% of it being replenished. This also allows for Uber chaining, which is funny if you're on TF2 YouTube in 2013. And all of this incredible utility being stacked into one stat comes at the sole negative of a 20% slower swing speed. I can see the vision behind this, as it does mean that each swing is more committal and makes it a bit more difficult for a medic to fully mine Ubers from enemies before being outgunned, but it's also remarkably lenient for how strong this weapon's positive is. For reference, this weapon has the same swing speed as the Market Gardener, Crit Gloves, and Ulapul Caber, which are all weapons that people generally like. Okay, maybe not the Caber, but you get what I mean. This is a ludicrously lenient negative that is not at all proportionate to this weapon's strengths, but again, I don't really know what else you could give it that wouldn't compromise its design. Fun fact, the Uber Saw has literally never received a mechanical change in TF2. It's virtually the same now as it was when it released in 2008. And honestly, despite how flabbergasted it sounded in this section, I'd probably be pretty bummed if the Uber Saw genuinely did get nerfed. Despite how powerful and over-centralizing it is to Medic, I don't think anyone would argue that it's OP or desperately needs to be changed. Medic kind of needs something like this, a risk versus reward offensive option to help vary up his gameplay and give him some dynamic decision making on the battlefield. Without the Uber Saw, Medic would be a much less fun class to play optimally. I like that a weapon which adds so much variance to Medic's game plan exists. Sometimes it's fun to throw yourself at a heavy for a Hail Mary swing or fish for a taunt kill. Well, it does kind of feel like shit to get killed by this thing and definitively know that you're feeding the enemy Medic. I think we can all agree that Medic as a class would be way worse without the option of the Uber Saw. It's not brilliantly balanced, but it's far from broken or game ruining, and I can name loads of TF2 weapons that I'd want to see changed before this one. It's fundamental to TF2, has existed for longer than some TF2 players have been alive, and truly is the Ubermensch of Medic melees.
Opal, rate my knife.
Oh,
rate the sharpness of my knife.
Is it you're playing sniper? Let me see, that's a good, pretty short knife. How do you like mine?
I don't know. Here, hold on. Let me. Here, can you?
Hey, that's not me.
Fucking
So there was a look at some best-in-slot unlockable weapons in TF2. Something I noticed about them while writing this video is that, despite how strong they all are, none of them are exactly broken, game-ruining, or problem weapons. They exist in this weird position where they do effectively outpace their class's stock weapons, and are, by all accounts, the true defaults for each class, yet also exist in relative harmony with the rest of the game's balance and don't ruin anything. Maybe the Jarate is a bit much, but otherwise, these weapons are core to TF2. Seeing any of them be nerfed would be like changing the logo or the color of the dirt on Dust Bowl. These weapons are parts of TF2's identity, its DNA, and while we can argue all day about balance or pay-to-win design, I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we pretended that the shotgun or SMG deserve more icon status than the Sandvich or Jarate. They may be stock replacements, but you can't replace them in our hearts. Thanks, hope you all have a fantastic day before, during, and after watching, and I'll catch you all later. Cheers!